Let us start the meeting. Mr. Clark?
Councilman Beal.
Here.
Councilman Medina. Phillips.
Here.
Here. Here. Everyone please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Everyone please be seated. Thank you. Good evening, to everyone this evening. Our first item will be to set, and fix the agenda for this evening. We had one item, to the councilman, and I also received a note from Councilwoman Bettina. She's sick tonight, actually. She says they're pretty bad with the flu and didn't want to contaminate us, so that's why she's not here. Since our lawyer is just walking in, this is a question we had negotiated a while back, Mr. Horan and I, with Old Hopewell Commons, and so I'm asking this in the context of the agenda item. This was a $35,000 fee in lieu of the recreation fee that was being charged under the old formula because of legality issues, and their lawyer, who Jim can attest to, is one of the best and raised some very good reasons why we should do it. So we negotiated in the course of this to have him pay the $35,000. Basically, it has to be designated, so it was designated to Spook Hill, Park. You have two items in front of you where what he wants to do is to take the $32,352 bond, bank check that he gave for bonding the road, Jim, and then he's replaced it with a surety bond. Right? And then he's going to give another check for $2,500, and then that adds up to the $35,000. Do we need a resolution accepting this, or is this just matter since we received the correspondence?
Right now, we'll put it in just as the correspondence, but I'll draft a formal resolution accepting the performance bond. So we're holding the bank check.
Right.
It was not deposited because they had indicated that, that they were contemplating doing this, so we held off depositing the check. So right now, we just have a check made payable to the town. It hasn't been deposited into any fund, so we'll deposit that directly into the Recreation Trust Fund with the 248, but we'll do a separate resolution approving the performance bond.
So at the appropriate time, beginning of the year or so, we'll do that. So then, seeing that's the case, and I have no proposed amendments to the agenda, this will just go in as correspondence, with respect to that. So seeing that, do I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
I'll move it. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passed. Next item is to acknowledge the two sets of minutes from November 6th meeting and November 13th meeting 2019. Do I have motions for those?
I'll move it.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passes. Before we get open to the public, I just want to make a couple of comments. One is I really welcome our high school students who are here today, to get credit for their school. I think all of us believe that civic, course and classes and also civic responsibility is very important, especially for our youth, to get more involved. So we appreciate you coming out, this evening. Tonight is the last meeting for this sitting board since there were elections in the fall. And while most of our members will return in January, Mike Cusmith, will not. I want to take the time right now just to thank Mike for his many, many years of dedicated service to the town. And at a later date, we will officially recognize his service. Since you're still here, you're not off the board, I don't want to do that tonight. It's premature. But I do want to say thank you, on behalf of the board and on the town. The past 2 years have witnessed, I think, many, many accomplishments in moving this town forward. And we will be discussing more in the weeks ahead, and certainly myself during the inauguration speech and any comments people will have. With tonight's resolutions that we have, I think we will have enacted approximately 500 resolutions, by this board in 2 years. Well, some of them are standard and organizational. The majority of them are not. And I want to, again, commend the board for the activity, that we've encountered and taken on, and for the support of the residents and the people that show up here with different opinions. During tonight's meeting, we'll continue to, I think, make improvements while addressing some major challenges. I have designed each one of our meetings to have certain discussions that are relevant to key issues, challenges to the town. And as you see from the agenda, we're talking about things ranging from part of our emergency services to environmental protection, to sewer, and water, treatment. And I think that these will continue to be a focus of our board because they are issues that have long challenged us and will continue to challenge just by the very nature of what we face. And during this year, I think we will be putting even more focus on infrastructure projects, whether it's water, sewer, and highway. We have been having a lot of active discussions on trying to ease highway, congestion and issues ranging from there will be new rehabilitation to the Wappingers Creek, Bridge that actually part of it sits in our town, to the circle, that's going to go in on New Hackensack Route 376, Old Hopewell, which is a county, project, and then water, sewer, and then more importantly, we're also continuing to focus on our people and our parks. And I think we have a number of initiatives, whether or not it's ranging from our veterans to our seniors that will be taking on a challenge. I would also like to welcome and acknowledge, and we'll have more opportunities starting with inauguration, our newly elected members of the community from the electorate. That's Mr. Cassell, Mr. Cavaschini, Lisa Paoloni, and also Mike Sheehan will be joining us at the beginning of the year. And before we go open to public comments on the agenda, I have several public service announcements I'd like to make. I just want to make sure I get them out now before, in case we have a later board after our executive session. One is that there's a very important fire district commissioner elections on tomorrow, Tuesday the 9th, from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock p.m.
Tuesday the 10th.
The 10th, I'm sorry. Tuesday the 10th. Today's the 9th. That's
Yes,
right.
correct.
Yes, sorry. It was written incorrectly, Mr. Cavaccini.
Okay, my bad.
Anyway, sorry. Thank you,
You're
Mr.
welcome.
Guzman. But that's going to be, voting for annual, fire commissioner elections, and they'll be held at the headquarters of each respective district. Chelsea Fire District's at 15 Liberty Street, Houstonville Fire District 88 Old Hopewell Road, New Hackensack Fire District 213 Myers Corners Road. And for any more further information on who's running and what's involved, please contact your local fire district. But I do want to stress this is an important part of our community, and I hope that people will turn out. It's one of those things where very few normally turn out, but I think it's important to show our support. The other item is that we do have Toys for Tots and the Angels of Light. Wappinger Town Hall's official donation location for both of those projects. Toys for Tots, as you know, is a program run by the United States Marine Corps Reserve, which distributes toys to children whose parents cannot afford to buy them gifts for Christmas. I've noticed that actually the number that we've gotten so far is well below the last year, and there was an item on CBS News this evening saying that overall numbers are down, a combination of the Thanksgiving holiday being a week later, and then also general economic challenges that people face. So please come out, put your toys in the box. And second is Angels of Light. That's a 501c3 organization whose mission is to provide holiday giving for children and families with life-threatening illnesses. We have a tree that we'll be putting up cards where people can make donations. They see the card they like, and then we'll be collecting that shortly. And then I do want to mention, as I just briefly alluded to, that we will be holding our inauguration ceremony for all of our newly elected and re-elected officials. That will be held on Saturday, January 4th. That is the correct date, isn't it, Mr. Cavaccini? Starting at noon here in this room. And we'll be having the swearing-in ceremonies of all the elected officials. I think Judge Heather Kitchen will be presiding over that. So I, welcome everybody. Please, come on out and participate in what you've already participated in electing, people. So we hope to see everyone come out to support the community. So I appreciate your, listening, to a few comments that I have. Now I'd like to move on to have a motion to open the public portion. This is then to have discussions on anything that's on the agenda.
I'll move it. Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passed. So if you have any comments generally with respect to the specific items that are on the agenda, if you haven't gotten the agenda, it's back on the podium behind there, then please come up, identify yourself, your name and your location within the town, and then we'll ask you to speak 3 to 5 minutes.
Up to 3 to 5
Up to
minutes.
3 to 5 minutes.
You don't have to
Yes,
speak 3
you
to
don't
5.
have to, yes. Otherwise, Mike will take care of the rest.
If there's no one that's going to speak, I just want to remind the students that are here to receive credit, you have to stay for the full 4-hour meeting tonight.
Yes,
Just kidding.
to midnight. Okay.
Seeing no comments, I'll make a motion to close the public portion.
Second. Okay, all in favor? Aye. You were raising your hand. Did that mean you wanted to talk?
Which means I had a question.
Oh, okay.
And the question would be, is there a time when you open the forum for a non-agenda item?
Generally, no.
Generally,
No.
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 If there's an issue of an importance, I would suggest you contact one of us beforehand so we can put it on the agenda and then it could be
Right.
discussed.
Yeah.
That's how
So
the agenda
come to my office, or send me an email, but come on by and then we can talk about that and figure out when's the right time. Or is there some other, forum? A lot of issues, and I just take a moment to explain it. It's just like, one that's on the agenda tonight. The board has limited authority for a number of things, particularly relating to zoning and planning board issues. So for example, tonight we are talking about a possible zoning change, but the planning elements of that will then go to the planning board, for review and consideration. So there's a number of items that don't come before this board, and therefore we always ask that they go to the zoning or planning board, for the proper public meetings or comments. But please come by my office and we can talk about it.
Michelle.
Sure. Okay, thanks. Okay, the first item that I've asked Danielle Salisbury to come up. She handed out a packet. She's been involved with us, or we've been involved with her in this Climate Smart Communities Grants Program, and she has a tool that we've been doing that relates to climate smart planning. It's kind of it's a very important one. I'll let her explain why it is important to the town. And so this is part of our ongoing efforts to really enhance the quality of life, and also it's not just environmental, but it's a variety of things that go together as part of the Environmental Protection Fund that the New York State offers. So Danielle, please.
Great,
floor is
thank
yours.
you. Thanks for having me. Yes, so I am from Cornell Cooperative Extension, Dutchess County, and I've been working with the town to improve their climate resiliency. What I've done with the town so far is work on a climate smart resiliency planning tool. And a little bit of background is how we were able to work with the town on this at no cost to the town is because we received money funding from the DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation, through the Hudson Estuary Watershed Resiliency Project with support from Water Resources Institute at Cornell University. And this is just to assist communities in completing action items in the Climate Smart Communities Certification Program. Some of you may have heard of this program before, may be familiar with it, but if you're not, just very briefly, the Climate Smart Communities Program is basically a robust framework for local governments to guide them in their climate action, to become more climate resilient, to be prepared for what's coming. Participation in this program is free and voluntary for local governments, and there are several different levels to participation in this program. The first level of which is you become a registered climate smart community, which the town of Wappinger is. Then there's following that there are several other levels, bronze, silver, and gold. And the way you reach these levels is by completing actions that are beneficial to your climate resiliency. So for example, one of these actions is to complete a climate resiliency planning tool. So the action item that I did with you all will count towards Climate Smart Communities certification. In your folders, you'll find more information about the Climate Smart Communities program, as well as there's a list of actions that are in that program that, that you can look through and kind of assess maybe what you've done so far. But what I'm going to talk about tonight is specifically the Climate Smart Resiliency Planning tool, which, having completed it now, you all will receive 6 points towards the 120 points to become bronze level certified. And I'll talk about that a little bit at the end as well. So the Climate Smart Resiliency Planning tool sounds like a lot, but it's basically just looks at your plans and ordinances to find resiliency gaps, where there are gaps in your plans and ordinances that don't necessarily have resiliency built into them, where they could be, and it could be beneficial. So the tool is this big Excel spreadsheet. There are 2 that are being passed around right now. And what I did was I sat down with members from the town. I gathered up all of the ordinances and plans that I could. I looked through them and answered this big long checklist with yes or no questions. For example, one of these questions on this checklist is, does the municipality have a FEMA-approved multi-hazard mitigation plan? Yes, you do. And then it asks about 20 different questions about that specific plan. Does it include X, Y, Z? So I go through, I sift through your plans, and I mark whether that's a yes or no. And then from that comes a list of recommendations on how you can improve your plans the next time you're doing an update, or to potentially look at creating new plans where there might be a gap. So in your folder, you'll also have a Town of Wappinger Climate Smart Planning summary. This summary includes a list of who I worked with in the town to help me complete this tool. It has a list of areas of strength that the town has. One example of that is that you all have a great relationship with your neighboring communities, which leads to beneficial collaborations like the tri-municipal wastewater treatment system upgrades. That's a great strength that this town has. It also has a list of areas of opportunities for the town, one of which is that you could invite people to join the town's CAC. Other municipalities we've worked with have strong CACs that can help actually the town or municipality apply for grants, which is one of the benefits to being in the Climate Smart Communities program.
For those that don't know what a CAC is, that stands for Conservation Advisory Council?
Yes, exactly. Sorry, thank you. So that's one area of opportunity. There's a few more listed there. And then following the strengths and opportunities that the town has, there are a list of recommendations based on the different sections of the tool. The first section of the tool looks at vulnerability and risk assessment in the town's plans and ordinances. For example, one recommendation from that section could be the next time the hazard mitigation plan is updated or the comprehensive plan, you could consider updating pre-existing maps to show vulnerable populations, including building stock and natural and cultural resources in relation to identified hazards. So each of these sections has a list of recommendations. I'll just read off one as an example. This section number 3 is public outreach and engagement, and one of which is you guys just recently updated your website, which looks fantastic, awesome. There can definitely be some more storm and emergency preparedness built in to that, and that would just be one recommendation for that. Section 4 is integration of municipal plans. The next time the comprehensive plan is updated, for example, you can include sustainability elements. So this list of recommendations just goes through kind of the next time you update X, Y, Z, think about including these things. The 5th section is disaster preparedness and recovery. And one recommendation from that would be to consider creating an evacuation plan or adding an evacuation plan component to the emergency preparedness plan. And then it has a list of things that you could include in that evacuation plan. And the last one, section 6, is hazard mitigation and implementation. Again, several recommendations under that one, but the one I would like to highlight is to consider becoming a climate smart community. So when you do become a climate smart community, you look at all of the points from that list, the list of actions. You sum up all of your points, you submit it to the Office of Climate Change, and if you become registered or certified, as a climate smart communities, you rank higher in grant applications for state funding. So this is becoming more and more popular in the area, and if you want to be competitive with funding, especially state funding, it is a really good idea to look into climate smart community certification. The Dutchess County just became climate smart community certified on the bronze level, which gives them, again, a leg up when they're applying for grants. So
Do you
that
know how many communities, municipalities in the county?
in the
are now
county,
part of it?
there are, just Dutchess County has been certified bronze and Red Hook has been certified bronze. I know there are other municipalities working on it, and part of the work that we do, aside from this, is help other communities assess where they are, look at all of the actions they possibly could have completed, and we also can help them with submittal as well. So just something to keep on your radar. It definitely will help with grants in the future, especially if you're looking to build resiliency. Are there any questions? I know there's a bit of information there.
The hazard mitigation plan for the town of Wappinger was a comprehensive approach that was completed in 2016, 2015, 2016. In my county capacity, I'm the county emergency manager. Every town, village, and city in Dutchess County has participated in that process, which allows municipalities to be eligible for federal hazard mitigation funding. There's a number of parallels I'm seeing through this process. We have about a 33-page document at dutchessmitigation.net. You can look at the Town of Wappinger Annex, which is the Town of Wappinger Plan. I think that I may be able to assist with some of the disaster preparedness aspects of this, because we do have a number of efforts in this town through various plans that can address some of these questions here.
Definitely.
I also was one of the members of this board that went through the entire realignment of the FEMA flood maps for this town, which was not a pretty situation. And I know that some folks that may be either attending or listening to this or watching this may get some erratic heartbeats when they hear us talking about the FEMA flood maps, because that was a multi-year effort to make those adjustments. So we want to make sure that as we approach something like this, we're doing this in a global fashion so that we don't inadvertently trigger a realignment again.
Exactly.
Because that was not a good situation. But that being said, my question to you would be, as a climate smart community at any level, are there specific grant funding, is there specific grant funding that's available only to climate smart communities, or is it just that you receive additional points on your grant application?
Just that you receive additional points on your grant application. Anybody can apply to these grants. However, yes, the higher up in level you are, the more points you receive on your grant application.
Okay. And the technical assistance that you're able to provide municipalities with is funded through the state DEC, is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
No, Danielle has been extremely helpful, and I see her and the organization going forward as a great resource for us to call upon.
And do you work at the Farm and Home Center, or are you?
Yes.
You do? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I know there's some questions in here relative to animal, animal evacuation, whatever. I happen to oversee the Dutchess County Animal Response Team, which meets at your facility at the Farm and Home Center, and it can easily develop an annex specific to the town of Wappinger.
That would be
would satisfy
fantastic.
some of this.
Yes. Yeah. That would be great. That's exactly the kind of stuff we're looking for.
Thank you.
My contact information is in the folder, so if you do come up with questions later, please feel free to email me, give me a call. I'm available.
Thank you very much, Danielle.
Thank you.
Look forward to working with you further. Thank
Same.
you.
Thank you very
Have a
much.
good evening. Happy holidays.
Thanks. Same.
Okay. Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Rob Stuck. Rob's here, sitting in the front. So he's going to talk to us about M-Star services that have been provided. Oh, I think I already gave you a copy. But anyway, yeah. And also, we're going to be in consideration for the contract renewal. And so I asked Rob to come and give us an overview. He has put together some slides reviewing the services that have been provided by M-Star over the last several years, but particularly focused on this year. You have both a handout and then it's on the screen for everyone that doesn't have one. So please, floor is yours, Rob.
Thank you.
Yeah, I put together, after you asked for some data for review, I went back to 2017 just so you can kind of see the last 3 years of how the system's been performing. And it's pretty much the same responses each year. The EMS system, the 2 ambulances next door, responding to about 2,000 calls for service a year. The way that's broken down is the dedicated units are the Wappinger units. So if we just look at 2019 year to date, so we see what this year is doing. Out of the 1,916 responses, the Wappingers, the 2 dedicated units next door, responded to 1,769 of them. And additional MSTAR units, which is backfilled from our core fleet, responded to the other 147 of them. The data below that shows the actual patient transports. So that was a patient treated and transported to the hospital. So out of that 1,916 responses, 1,519 patients were actually transported to the hospital. 1,448 by the 2 dedicated units next door, and 71 by MSTAR units. The other 300-400 difference there is your cancels on scene, your fire standbys, lift assist, auto accidents. A lot of times there's multiple patients there, but they don't go to the hospital, but it still goes into to a response. So it's a busy system. It's probably one of the busiest in Dutchess County. The average response time, as you can see, from 17, we were running an average response time from call to scene of 7 minutes and 39 seconds. It went up a little in 18 to 8 minutes and 28 seconds. And it's at its lowest for 2019 of 7 minutes and 26 seconds. I kind of give it, us being back in the emergency services building, both units stationed together, a little less quarters for them to get lost in. So it shaved a minute off the response times. But I will say, even at the 828 last year, those response times in this county are phenomenal. I don't know some of the other fire department run systems, but I would put these times up against them as well. It's a phenomenal service that you're providing to the residents. One of the areas of concerns, or actually we had 2 areas of concerns that we started to address in 2019. We did make some progress on one. The other we're still working on, and we're hoping to maybe in the next few months bring some closure to that. And that was the town of Wappinger units going out to neighboring communities under mutual aid. And mutual aid is a necessary tool for every EMS system. There's going to be times where the surge is just too much for the dedicated units. However, the town of Wappinger units are supplementing surrounding communities that don't have the proper service. And what I mean by that is East Fishkill was a problem in years past. In February of this year, they went with our service with dedicated units, just like the town here. And we reduced the times that the Wappinger units are going into East Fishkill by almost 60%. The area of concern that's still growing is Beacon, which is struggling with their ALS service and just coverage in general. And as you can see, in 18, the town of Wappinger units went into their community 52 times. And in 19, and we're not done with 19, has gone in 73 times. So they have a really lack of coverage with their current provider over there. We have met with them. We had a pretty productive meeting again last week. But they have some additional challenges because they run a volunteer ambulance service, and it makes it hard to provide them just ALS when there's no, the way we fund our services through patient transports. So without a patient transport, it's hard to provide them service where there's no funding. However, they're looking at supplementing that to try and correct this problem. I've been an advocate. I've made it clear to both supervisor and to some of the councilmen that they're very well aware that this is beyond the mutual aid system that's in place in Dutchess County. That's, you know, the taxpayers are paying for 2 dedicated units to be in the town of Wappingers. While we're going to assist our neighbors, we're not going to provide them the EMS service that they're lacking in their communities. So those are the things we're working on. Like I said, we had success with one this year. Hopefully we'll have success with the other in the next few months.
So East Fishkill was an issue. It's been corrected. The city of Beacon is continuing to become more of an issue. Rob and I have spoken about this a number of times. There's really an ethical component to this because that city is having some challenges with its volunteer ambulance corps. They're having some issues with the on-shift units. They do pay individuals during the day from that ambulance corps pays staff to be there during the day, but they only have one unit on, so that one unit goes out, right? And another call comes in the city of Beacon. If it's a life-threatening call, sometimes there's no other units available except for the town of Wapacher. So yes, as a town, we could say, well, no more, we're not gonna go into the city of Beacon, but talking to Rob over the last few months, we were hoping that the city would find a solution with a provider and enter into an agreement so that we wouldn't have to put ourselves in a position where we're making a decision to not assist them. There's a new administration starting in January. Perhaps that conversation can continue in a proactive way. But right now, with these numbers increasing, it's really not fair to the residents of the town of Wapacher to have one of our units that are supposed to be here for the town of Wapacher residents to be constantly, responding to the city of Beacon. It's a real issue, and I can tell you that throughout the county, this is not an uncommon situation throughout the county. This town, having an ambulance district and having 2 ALS ambulances here on our campus responding to calls is, in my opinion, and of course I am biased sitting here, it is a very responsible approach, a very affordable approach, and I can tell you from being out there working with these crews that lives have been saved. And decisions that this board will make or can make and decisions that other boards make ultimately can result in lives saved or lives lost. And I think that we have really approached this in a responsible manner. But I do think we're approaching a point where there really has to be a serious conversation with our friends to the south because it can't continue to increase 20% each year.
Well, perhaps, Bill, it's something you and I should go and let the new administration get settled a little bit.
Sure.
Then I'll be happy to raise, get a meeting scheduled.
Certainly.
Yeah. I'd also like to add to what you're saying is that what goes unseen often is that Rob and his organization have been very responsive when we hold a number of events in the town and throughout the town, whether it's a community day or some other organization, like recently the Sikhs, have an event, and so he's been very supportive in putting vehicles on site instead of being in the garage to actually further increase the response time if, heaven forbid, there were some incident that would occur. So, they've really become part of the community and all aspects of it.
Yeah, and to that, some of the initiatives we're working on in 2020 that we've been working on for a while now, but hope to bring some closure to them as well is, obviously we still do the summer camps and the medical direction for those,
Right.
As well as the CPR training for
Right.
both public and officials here.
Right.
Is we're really trying to bring home some form of mobile integrated health or community paramedicine. And while they're still not adopted by the state of New York, there are some programs that we're reviewing with our receiving facilities. We came up with the community outreach program or the COP program, which would be identifying the continual users of the 911 system in the town, identifying why we are continually called to the residents, what we're treating them for, and then analyzing that data with the hospital's data as to what they're being treated for and released at the hospital, because the two are never the same, especially if you have someone that's calling because they're lonely or they didn't take their medication. The goal of the program is to really isolate what the issue is that's causing them to repeatedly call 911, and then come up with a treatment plan, which could involve just the dedicated units. If we know a certain patient calls every 2 weeks because they're lonely or because they forgot to take their medication, we can get them on a schedule where we go over and see them before that 2-week time frame and say, did you take your medication? Right. Or just do a well visit and just the the loneliness, if that's what's causing them to go up to the emergency room.
So as part of that, and a part of our senior program, Jessica, we put together this training, an awareness training. And so Rob and his team have been very supportive, and we're hoping to expand that along the lines he's mentioning, because we are covering now a number of seniors, hopefully even more, as we look at other ways to improve that activity, both here and in the village. So Rob's been very supportive of that.
The last session we held with the seniors a few months back was very informative. They had a lot of questions. A lot of seniors were unaware that the Medicare numbers are changing, and they're doing away with everyone was always used to using their Social Security number with an A as their Medicare number, and that's changed. They're being issued all new Medicare numbers. So they had a lot of questions of where do I find that, how do I get that, as well as just accessing the system and what it's there for. So those sessions have been going fairly productive.
And Rob's put together, as you see here, I've asked them to put together and provide us regularly, data. And if there's any additional information that you would like to receive, then mention it, to Rob now or some other time, and then he'll be very willing to help pull together data from different angles.
Some of the reports I left out because they have a lot more
Right.
detail to them, so I produce them monthly. The reports I showed you here is just some of the stuff that we look at continually, because the 911 system is always changing. The time of day, the day of week. I just did 18 and 19, so you can kind of look. For 2019, Thursdays are the busiest day in the town of Wampus for EMS calls. 2 o'clock consistently for 18 and 19 seem to be the time that everyone's accessing the 911 system. But we're continually monitoring that so that we're adjusting our backfill support to make sure that if both units are out, that we're able to supplement the system, and that's how we were able to hit 100, almost 150 additional calls that the two dedicated units can cover.
Any particular part of the town that seems to be more problematic than others?
Obviously Route 9 is an extremely busy corridor for us. And then there are several residents that will fall into the outreach program that utilize the system frequently. So we want to make sure that we're getting them the services that they need, but at the same time not taking the 911 ambulance out of service for something that really didn't need to go to the hospital. So, but that is a large number of the volume. We work with like the Avalon and some of the nursing facilities. That's extremely challenging. There's a lot of turnover in those facilities. Trying to get them to recognize what is a non-emergency call, to call a 7-digit number to get an ambulance for elevated blood work, or something that is non-emergent but does need to go to the facility, to the hospital, versus dialing the 911 system. We make some progress, some staff changes, and they wind up accessing the 911 system again for a patient that really didn't need it.
It's gotten better. I mean, the common denominator with these skilled nursing facilities and some of these residences where they have LPNs or home health aides, and you hit it right on the head. I mean, it could be a medical emergency versus not really a medical emergency, 911 versus a 7-digit number, and taking one of the ambulances that's a 911 ambulance out of service for something that is really not an emergency can really have a domino effect if something else happens in the town. So, I mean, I've talked to Rob about this a couple times, and they've been proactive with these facilities. But again, as he said, depending on who the staff member is that day, it could be totally different just a week later. But overall, I will say that, I listen all day long to calls as part of my day job, and it has definitely made a difference in the town of Wappinger. I can tell you that there are other facilities in Dutchess County where it's, every day there's an ambulance being taken out of service. I've been an EMT for almost 25 years, and I worked on an ambulance right here in this building in 1995 to 2000. And I can tell you that, and Rob will agree with me, there is an EMS crisis, not only in this county, not only in this state, but in this country. And I think this town has been very proactive with making sure our residents have qualified advanced life support ambulances available to them. And I listen all day long and hear people waiting for ambulances in areas around Dutchess County. And it does not happen very often here in this town. There will be times in this town where there'll be multiple calls happening at the same time, which just happens, and the backfill unit will need to be utilized, as you see right here. But one of the advantages to having M-Star here in the town of Wappinger and having Mobile Life contracted in the village of Wappingers Falls is if there is a need for another service to assist, we have two services that are basically right next to each other that can backfill each other, and that does happen occasionally. So I think that's to our advantage to have two different agencies in the immediate vicinity. So I think that this system works, and I use this as a model when I talk to other towns and other villages and even the cities. This ambulance district, that model that we have is something that towns can adopt. Villages have general fund contracts with providers, and cities do the same thing. But from a town perspective, I think that this model, especially for a town of almost 30,000 people that has 40,000 cars a day on Route 9 and 19,000 cars a day on 9D, I think that this model works very well for our town. And we don't have the power struggle that some of the other towns have. Some of the other towns, to be fair, have fire districts that have ambulance services, and they have to figure out, is it time to give up the ambulance, or is it time to staff their ambulance with folks from another agency? So it's not, I don't want to imply that it's a simple solution. It's not. It depends on the municipality that you're in. But I think, and I know as a former fire chief, that this system does work here in this town, and there are many people that provide oversight at all times if there's an issue, and sometimes I have to tell them it's never going to be 100%. There's always going to be that time where, yes, we may have a delayed response for something. If it's a low priority call, it doesn't always have to be a 7-minute response. Sometimes it can be a little bit longer. Right. But I think that overall, the folks in this town really are well protected by this service.
Thank you. Yeah, Jim, you're right.
To Bill's point regarding an ambulance district, when the town of Wappinger created the ambulance district here in this town, it got special legislation in Albany. The ambulance district did not exist as a matter of law that was available for towns, and since that time, the special district law has been amended to permit special districts to be created in all towns. So, this town has been at the forefront of, these issues, because typically, when the supervisor's head explodes every time I have to talk to him about A fund and B fund charges. But the reason why that is ambulance under the financial system promulgated by the New York State Controller, an ambulance service is an A-fund charge. So if you have a village, the village residents would be paying for ambulance services in addition to if they have their own ambulance services.
Right.
So as Bill said, and the other issue, as Bill notes, there is no obligation for a town to provide ambulance services. So, there are towns throughout, some towns in the state that do not provide an ambulance service at all. And there's towns in Dutchess County that do not provide ambulance services. The services are provided by fire districts and not by the towns. So, it's a very complicated issue, thanks to the laws in the state of New York. The town has, done a good job, in my estimation, of negotiating all of the pitfalls that are out there in a legal basis, because there's also issues with Medicaid reimbursement and Medicare reimbursement. Right. And, so there's, all kinds of anti-kickback legislation. It's a very, very heavily regulated industry, and, one misstep can cause all kinds of issues. And we've been very fortunate in the town to make this a high priority, and I think deliver, services to the residents. And, there's been issues here and there, but, by and large, it's been very, very successful.
On one of those points, Jim, I think that when at least I first came into office, one of the issues that was raised was with respect to the reimbursements. I think Rob has made a good effort to clarify the situation, respond to questions, as we've also been addressing the senior center. So I have not seen, I don't know if any of the other councilmen have seen, but haven't seen any questions recently. So I assume, Rob, you're continuing to do a good job there.
So Rob, to that point, I mean, the issue regarding reimbursement comes up on the mutual aid calls when somebody comes in from another jurisdiction. Is there any kind of pattern to that activity, or is it just kind of, it just happens?
It just happens, and on that first sheet,
Right.
those numbers are on the bottom.
Yeah.
So for 19, it's been 36 times that
Right.
another agency has come in to the town of Wapping.
Is it typically Mobile Life?
I would imagine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mobile Life will be, I mean, the protocol is Mobile Life will be the ALS backup. But
Right.
we're hearing in the county right now where commercial agencies are unavailable, period. And this is getting to a scary point. You'll hear in some areas where there's no contracts in place, you'll hear MSTAR, no units available, Mobile Life, no units available, NDP, which is Northern Dutchess Paramedics, no units available. In the town of Wappinger, we have dedicated units, and we went with a dedicated model for that reason.
Right.
And part of that dedicated model approach was to have the name of the town on the side of the ambulances, and people laughed when we said that.
Right.
And having worked in EMS previously, I know the shell game, all due respect. You know, agencies will move their ambulances all over the place, and no one will know whose ambulance is whose, right? And listen, I know that system status management has theoretically works in certain ways, but this town has stuck with a dedicated service model, which I believe serves this town the best. And you're right, there's no legally mandated requirement for us to provide ambulance service, and our position has been this is our moral responsibility to the residents. And some of the fire departments go above and beyond and respond on life-threatening medical emergencies as well. They don't have to,
Right.
but they do, right? Because in this town, I think it's safe for me to say here at the dais that we take this more seriously perhaps than other municipalities do. This is something that directly affects our residents and can affect our family members. So the moral approach is really why we are where we are. And you can look at, in this town, under this contract, there are some times where we have mutual aid resources coming in. The question has been, if Mobile Life comes in and treats a patient in the town of Wappinger, right, what is the protocol by which that individual, what do they do with the bill when do they get a bill for Mobile Life, or how does that
Yes.
work?
Yeah, they're gonna get billed, and with the difference between us and another service coming in is we only accept insurance payments from town residents. So the balance of that bill is written off as part of the stipend provided by the town. If Mobile Life comes in after the insurance, if there's a copay or a balance, they're gonna bill the patient for that. So they are gonna see a bill for the difference between insurance and what the patient responsible is.
So the question would be, Jim, does the town have a responsibility to reimburse a resident if a
Well, ultimately, at the end of the day, that really should be, and it's one of, I've looked at the mutual aid agreement, and the mutual aid agreement is, to this issue of reimbursement, is tremendously unclear. It really doesn't provide any, it's, we've had the issue come up a number of times, and I forgot the language. It's payment based on, I believe it's payment based on the policy of the responding agency, I think is technically the way it's written. And so in that case, if the town of, MSTAR is responding in the town of East Fishkill, our policy is we only reimburse residents of the town of Wappinger, so we wouldn't reimburse, MSTAR for East Fishkill residents, and that's typically the thing. I think from a point of view at the county level for the mutual aid agreement, I think it should be addressed in some manner because, a resident is getting a bill simply because of the timing of the call. So I think at the end of the day, and that was basically the reason why I asked the question about Mobile Life. It may be that the town could certainly enter into an agreement with respect to Mobile Life if that's 95 or 98% of the calls where, we would contract with Mobile Life on these, mutual aid call-ins to avoid, the issue that comes up with the residents. So,
I
that's
mean,
certain that's possible.
I would argue that you know, if Mobile Life has to treat a resident in the town because our ambulances are on other calls in the town, then certainly I would believe that the town would be, the subsidy should cover any out-of-pocket expense for that resident with Mobile Life. If that's the case, there shouldn't be a penalty because, you know, there was other ambulances out on calls.
I know on the fire district side, there's provisions for, you know, various districts responding to calls out of district, and, you know, certain costs can be charged back and forth.
Right, I'm not
between
sure if
districts.
commercial ambulances, how that falls into the mutual aid plan.
Right, so, I mean, that's the thing where, you know, it doesn't, there's a lot of different, it's, for the ambulance, because of the different natures of the responding agency, you've got paid fire departments, you got volunteer fire departments, you got paid
Right.
ambulance services. So everybody kind of has a different cost model, but.
So can we address that as we, you know, as we
It's a good idea.
formalize,
No, I think it's very good.
as we formalize the agreement moving
Right.
forward, if we can address that.
I mean, the
and so-
problem is, it's really not the
His-
issue, it's not in the contract between us and them, it's the contract, it's a mutual aid contract, because
Right.
we don't have, and that's ultimately the problem, is the agencies that are sending the bill to the residents is Mobile Life or somebody we do not have a contract with.
So do we first address that at the county level, or can we go directly with Mobile Life at this time to negotiate something?
I would,
I think you're gonna have to address that with Mobile Life.
yeah.
Huh? Yeah,
Because
Yeah,
it's
and this
truly-
came up previously
It
too.
did.
Years ago, when MSTAR,
The Outback one?
well, no, not specific calls, but when MSTAR was born, right?
Right.
In the town of Wabasha, after Transcare
Right.
died, MSTAR was born. Mobile Life, we had a plan in place because we had an indication that things were not going to be going well for Transcare. So Mobile Life was set up that
Right.
if Transcare goes away, Mobile Life would cover our calls until we moved forward. And of course, it happened at 4 o'clock on a Friday, like everything else does. And Mobile Life ended up covering our calls, and it was just a separate agreement that was in place. When we finally went to RFP and brought both agencies in, the discussion was whichever agency doesn't get the contract, if we can have an agreement to cover these types of scenarios with the other agency, that would be good. But I don't think we ever.
I don't think that ever-
I met once, with the Mobile Life, I forget his name, and he had indicated, Bill, a willingness to sit down and talk with us about that. But,
Okay.
so we can bring that up during the new year.
Okay.
One other question regarding the issue in Beacon. Are they also is Fishkill, units from Fishkill also responding there too?
Well, Beacon Volunteer Ambulance covers the city of Beacon and the surrounding areas in the town of Fishkill. And
Okay.
basically, my understanding is that there are certain ambulances that are on-shifted during the daytime with paid personnel. I'm not sure what agency, do they work for an agency, or are they MSTAR, or are they,
No, they pay.
they're their own, they're their own? They're their
That's
own
actually
people.
that's a fairly common model in a lot of.
Right, but here's the issue, though. The issue is, there have been situations, and Rob and I have talked on these days, where they will off-shift their ambulance, and there'll be nobody there. And I only know this because I work at the 911 center. So when they off-shift their ambulances, and they're not supposed to be doing this, and they don't have anyone covering that city, that becomes a problem for this town, because inadvertently what will happen is this town will end up sending a unit to that city. Now, full disclosure, I've had conversations with BVAC's chief and the powers that be, and said this cannot happen, and he's agreed that they've found a solution. But now, my understanding is they have one ambulance on. So when that first ambulance goes out, there's really no mechanism to have a backfill unit covering that city. Sometimes Mobile Life's available, they're the primary unit. Sometimes Mobile Life isn't available, right? So in that case, there's no ambulance available. I mean, they've even had situations where the town of Wappinger is unavailable, Mobile Life is unavailable, Phillipstown ambulance is unavailable, and they'll send East Fishkill to the city of Beacon. So we want to try to be proactive, finding a solution whereby this town is not going to be the primary responding unit to the city of Beacon. That should not happen.
Yeah, well, and it's a twofold problem there. You're right. One is just staffing their own ambulance, but the other issue, which is why it's causing so much grief right now, is they have no ALS service at all. It's just a BLS service.
Right.
So whether they get their ambulance out or not,
Good point.
40-50% of the time, they're still gonna be requesting another agency for the ALS portion.
Right, and that's the thing. If the town of Wappinger ambulance ends up responding to the city of Beacon only for the paramedic on board, right? Now you're taking one of our units out of service just to provide a paramedic to an ambulance that already is crewed. And you're gonna have 2 ambulances going to the hospital. So
And we don't usually get reimbursed for that.
that's the other, see, I didn't know that. That's the other side of it. But for me, monitoring the town of Wappinger assets during the day, it's a concern because we're down 1. And I know once we're down 1, you get the normal call on Route 9, now you're down to 0, you gotta wait for a backfill unit. And I gotta say, Rob has been very good with backfill units coming out of the city of Poughkeepsie to cover this town. But we can't depend on backfill units every day
Right.
because one of our units is out of the town. That's unacceptable.
Well, and just as East Fishkill, I think, has strengthened the county response in that MSTAR is now providing contiguous service from Beekman, Pauling, East Fishkill, and now Wappinger. So what's actually happening, why you saw the decrease from Wappingers going into East Fishkill, is now that there's dedicated units in each of those communities, mutual aid is much easier.
Yeah.
Because if both Wappinger units are out, you know you have a dedicated unit right next door in East Fishkill. So bringing Beacon on board to a more steady system is not only gonna help Beacon, it's gonna strengthen the whole system on this end of the county, because that will give every community basically
Right.
up through the city of Poughkeepsie dedicated resources. So if one community is really getting hammered with an incident, you're not gonna hear no units available anymore.
Right.
Because you know you have a dedicated unit sitting in the community next door. So it's not only helping the one municipality, but it's strengthening
Sure.
the
Right.
whole system.
And if anyone wants to read about the issues around the county, there's a Citizens Advisory Committee on EMS that you can read on the county website. As you read through that, you will also see documented response times for the town of Wappinger, which show this town much stronger than many other ones in that
And,
document.
You know, the one thing I took from that report that I thought was crucial was the systems that seem to be working are those that have dedicated resources.
Those that have contracts,
Yeah.
you'll see a correlation between the municipalities that don't have contracts and not having service available.
Okay,
Thank you.
very good. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next item, actually, we can combine them as concerning the park use forms and also park signs, which we've discussed a couple times, and then you, and I think Steve's here as well. So why don't you talk some more about it?
All right, I'm forms, he signs, so I got up here first, so we're next. So I had mentioned during the budget season, that first meeting after the budget, that we were gonna pick up this topic of the use of our facilities, our park facilities, for a variety of different uses, also streamlining and making it easier for individuals with unusual uses to be able to rent our facilities. So since the last time you saw this packet, there's only been a change of 2 lines. That's about it. One of them is through the recommendation of the zoning department, was looping in the fire inspector on any event that requires tents to be put on site. And then also on the page about applications for the event, it's going to be on the description of the event page. It does say that you may be asked to provide a layout map of your event. It's not something that we feel like we're going to require for every event, but in the event that something looks like it's going to be larger than average, we are going to reserve the right to ask for a layout map from the applicant. So I think one of the most important things moving forward with this process is a couple of things. Right now, nothing in here actually conflicts with on-code aspects of park use, even if things change when it comes to the park signs. There's nothing in here conflicting with the open hours of the park. There's also nothing conflicting with the unused policy of the town board being able to permit waivers for alcohol in parks. And the other important aspect of this is we do have the right to reserve, not arbitrarily, but the right to reserve, refuse any permit that comes in if we feel like it is not going to be a feasible use for one of our facilities. And the questions on this form are not all there is to obtaining a permit to use our facility. What it is meant to do is to open the door for that communication for each individual department to assess the request against their own standards. So we ask questions about tents, about cooking, about placement of certain items on the site, and then that opens up the conversation with the zoning department, with the fire inspector, to hold this request against the standards of those individual departments. So, for example, and this is a semi-non-standard use, but fits with our current policy. This weekend, we have a request that I'm hopefully going to approve unless anyone has a problem, for the Hudson Valley Coursing Association. They are a dog agility training place. They want to hold an agility training at Airport Park. They're a business or a nonprofit organization. They've provided me with the insurance. They're willing to pay the fee. That fits with everything in our existing policy. However, if we were to go with something like this new policy, I would have more leeway to ask them, what are you doing? Are you bringing a tent? How can we make this better? Should we be referring this to somebody else? So, as hopefully at the next meeting we have a resolution to pass this policy as it is, I'd just like you all to keep that in mind, that the questions that are on this form are not the end of the discussion with the applicant. Does that make sense? Help it along at all?
Say that again?
So just that, looking at this form as a document, the questions that are on this form are not the only discussion that's going to be taking place with this applicant. It is to put them in contact with the departments. So to put them in, knowing that they need to talk to the zoning administrator because they're going to have tents. Knowing that they need to talk to the fire inspector because there's going to be cooking. Things like that. So it puts them in contact with those departments, and then it's up to the applicant in that department to make sure that the standards of zoning or the standards of the fire code are met.
Hey, what if somebody's bringing a bouncy house?
That's something that we, with a liability insurance certificate from the vendor, have always allowed.
What's our insurance company say about that?
Our insurance company says as long as they're providing us with that liability insurance certificate, bouncy house companies generally hold liability up to $5 million, as opposed to the $1 million that we require from other businesses, that's okay.
I think one of the issues that we're seeing with bouncy houses is that people have insurance, they have them set up, but they don't properly stabilize them.
Okay.
So do we have any sort of mechanism for inspection or anything like that? You're not even allowed to have a bouncy house on county property for anything.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. That is true, yeah.
No, well, I mean, I would think that if you get one from I don't think the average person could come in and bring a bouncy house. I think, you'd have to have some sort of certification from the person who, the company that installs it.
Exactly. And what happens is when we're requiring that additional liability insurance certificate and it's coming from the vendor,
Yeah.
the responsibility goes on them because they're providing us that insurance under their policy to come in and do it right, because they don't want the claim against them either.
I just don't want anybody to get hurt. I don't care whose
No.
the insurance falls on. I don't want
Yeah.
anybody to get hurt.
I mean, the other issue is typically, now I don't know from the supervision point of view. I mean, there's one issue regarding the setup of the item.
Right.
There's a secondary issue regarding supervision of the people using it. So, And I don't, typically the companies that rent them don't provide somebody on site to.
No.
No, that they
So
don't.
that's typically the issue. So I can reach out to the county attorney's office. I'm curious, that's the first I'm
Just reach
hearing
out to
of that.
risk management.
Okay.
And also revisit the acceptance rules, the representations, warranties, and the
Those-
indemnification that's
yeah.
part of this package, Jim, if you would
Okay.
take a look at that and see what also the county's doing when it comes to that, because
A lo-
maybe we want to strengthen that a little
A
bit.
lot of that is stolen from the county, sorry.
Not stolen, borrowed.
Borrowed. It is
not
borrowed.
Shared, no, shared service.
Shared services. Nearly the
It's in the
alcohol.
public domain.
Exactly.
We
And
have
it
a shared
hasn't,
services agreement.
Jim, it
I think
hasn't
it's
changed
covered.
since the last time we had you look at it, but feel free to go through it again.
I can tell you that at
So-
Bowden Park, where the office is for the county parks, their process, I just went through this for the Boy Scouts to use
Yeah.
a pavilion. I mean, it's really specific. I mean,
Yes.
we should definitely have our eyes on what they're doing, and make sure that we have the levels of oversight to protect the town and the people that are there to a point. I mean,
Yes.
the other question I would have is, will the event require the closure of any road? I think I would put that in a way where they're requesting the use of a road, because technically the highway superintendent, correct me if I'm wrong, the highway superintendent is supposed to authorize use if they're gonna use a town road, is that correct?
Yeah.
So there's actually some provisions in the VTL regarding temporary closures, and it actually falls under, and then it depends on, there's provisions in the VTL that regard closing roads for parades, road races, things of that sort. And in
Yeah.
those situations, the authority comes out of the town board.
Okay.
Not out of the highway superintendent. But, and this came up, I guess, with one of the road races. I did a little research, and I actually borrowed some
Yes.
language from some other municipalities regarding parades and things of that nature. So it's something we don't have in our code. For some reason, I thought we did, but we don't really have anything in the code regarding, and we do have, I mean, the race provisions, there's two race provisions. One applies to actually having, and it goes back to the 20s, but having a road race through the town where, you would set up a race course, which, back around in the early 1900s was actually a big thing. And so there's provisions in the law that still carry forward regarding setting up races on public highways. But also, there's a similar provision where you could do it to have a road race for runners or things of that sort. So, but there's a permit process, and you can adopt a code, a code section. And, the thing on those, because with respect to parades, I was surprised to look at. It seems like every year there is a case regarding the St. Patrick's Day Parade that makes it to the appellate division or New York Court of Appeals regarding someone who got injured falling in a pothole, slipping on ice, and
Yeah.
so the case law there's a lot of case law on that. So people injured marching in a parade actually generates a lot of litigation, so to the extent
But
that.
at this time, then, it's within the prerogative of the highway superintendent, or what role does the board play?
Well, again, what the VTL says is the town can set up certain permit requirements to
Which-
obtain a permit
Correct, I
for a
understand that.
parade or for a.
Yeah.
So it would be.
So do we have to set
And
that up
that's-
within the superintendent's jurisdiction, or is that something separately that, say, the clerk's office or recreation can issue a permit?
Again, by, the.
Code.
Whatever
We
the
can
code says.
determine it,
the
okay.
And
per-
I think we've had things come up, again, with road races, like the Pumpkin Run, which didn't happen. We didn't end up having to do anything with the San Filippo Run because it wasn't actually on town roads, but it seems like anytime someone comes to us, we all look at each other and go, where do we start? And really what I put in here, and the reason being, we still have the right to refuse it, but is at least to know reach out to that resident and say, these are the agencies you should be contacting. You need to prove to us that you've contacted these agencies.
I'm not so sure, though, putting the onus on the person to say that they contacted an agency is enough to satisfy a permit application. I mean, you know, around this county, there have been road races going on for decades where the roads are wide open and people are just running down the road with cars.
Yeah.
And that in 2019 is not the best practice
No.
for obvious reasons we've seen over the last 5 years. So when we had an issue most recently where they were planning a race on our town roads and not planning on closing the roads, that was a red flag to me. Being involved with a number of races, including a marathon here in Dutchess County, where we spend months planning to make sure that we fortify that track because of what has happened in recent years at road races. I don't want to be in a position here at the town where we're giving someone permission to hold an event on a town road and there are no, you know, protective levels.
Now, based on that, I did research at that time, and the statutes regarding the regulation of parades and, you know, other events of parades, processions, road races, apparently the county does not have any jurisdiction. So the town has jurisdiction even over the county roads. They just don't have jurisdiction, and they have somewhat limited jurisdiction over the state highways.
Right, the
So-
state DOT permits are supposed to be in place if you're going to use a state road for a parade.
I think it's more than 10 minutes. You can close it for less than 10 minutes or something like that. It's some weird provision, but on its face, the vehicle and traffic law section regarding regulating parades, so if it's on a county road in the town, it's the town board. So the town board and not the county that has the regulatory authority.
So you, Bill, you would probably be the best one to be able to tell me if these different agencies would provide proof of notification. So if you look at this, we have in here for the permit, if it will impact traffic, you must contact Dutchess County 911, the New York State Police, Dutchess County Sheriff's Department, and Fire Department based on location. And on there, it says proof of approval by these agencies is
The
required.
people that answer
doesn't-
those phones aren't going to know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, so
No,
the
that's
onus
okay.
is on us.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is make sure there's a mechanism by which we receive a permit, right? And now we're going to notify those entities and
Yeah.
say, we have a permit, here's a copy of it. It's been okay with the town, this is for your informational purposes, and then they will run that up the chain, because there are a number of municipalities that have a similar approach like this.
I was gonna say I
And
borrowed.
I can tell you that the secretary in my office,
Yeah.
you know, doesn't even know what to do with that information.
Got
So
it.
it's not getting to the right
Yes.
people. But
I'll let
as-
those
as
know
we-
who I borrowed it from,
as-
the same thing.
as we craft this, certainly we can, I think, put the onus on the municipality. Once we approve this permit process, our professionals here will know who to speak to specifically at these entities and let them know what's going on and if there's any objections. The other thing is, there might be a use of a park that would require a Department of Health permit for food and
Right.
sanitation purposes.
That's in here. Anything that has vendors, which a commercial agency that is selling or serving food does have to get Board of Health approval. A private person who is serving food to their family and friends do not have to get that. So
Right.
that falls under the peddler's permit regulations through the clerk's office, which does require the submission of a Board of Health application. So that one we've got covered.
And then the other one, you know, not to belabor this, but the other trigger is mass gathering permit, Part 18, I believe it is.
20
It's 5,000.
5,000,
So,
yeah.
obviously, if there's going to be a 5,000 person event, you would think the town board's going to be in the loop.
Yes. Anything over 500, I actually, outside of the mass gathering permits that are the very, very large things, I have for our purposes, over 500 people.
Right, so I think the
That
town
it comes
board
to the town board.
needs to be, you know, part of that decision-making process. I mean, this past weekend, I just was involved with Sinterklaas in the village of Rhinebeck, 10,000 plus people in the village of Rhinebeck. And the planning process for those types of events begins months and months before they happen. So if somebody comes to the town and says, I want to do an event with 1,000 people and it's going to be next month, it's not happening.
No,
Yeah.
no, absolutely not. it wouldn't make it through the chain of people that it needs to go through fast enough, and that's a very reasonable response to give to someone. We can't get this through the number of people that it needs to get through in a timely manner for that to happen. So outside of switching the responsibility of contacting the outside agencies for road use and things like that, do we see any other things that you would like revised before I try to do this as a resolution at the next
Well,
meeting?
I think, we've asked Mr. Haran to take a review of that, and particularly some of the liability
Yeah.
statements and indemnification requirements. I think as Councilman Beal stated, we want to make sure that the whole process is
Okay.
perhaps a little bit
Yeah.
better defined, and having the burden, or
On
not the
us.
burden, but the responsibility on us to make
For
sure
us
that
to
they
be the
follow
agency that works
and we,
with the-
do our due diligence
Yeah.
on what they're doing.
But outside of that, it seems like, each time we've kind of put our eyes on this, there's been a different aspect of it.
But that's the
that-
purpose for
Yeah,
these
no,
discussions, is to
exactly,
try
but
to
I'm
flesh it out.
hoping that we're
Right.
at the end of that.
Yeah,
So
well,
that
I'd
next
like
time,
to target it for the first regular meeting
Yes.
in January, after we set the meetings, that
Okay.
we would
So-
present something more formal to the board for consideration. Whether or
resolution.
not it passes that time or is tabled, we'll have to see what the other issues are.
yeah. no,
I
Because
guess-
we'll also have another new board member,
Yes.
although he's sitting here, so he's doing his job already, but,
We'll talk.
we'll have to look at it at that
Let the
point.
fun begin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's
He's put on
what,
notice.
the purpose of kind of coming before you again this one last time before I try to put it through legal was
No.
to say, what else have we come up with
Right.
that we want to fine
No, I
tune
appreciate that,
before?
and I think it's good, and I think, when we
Yeah.
more really look at the use of some of our parks,
Yeah.
we're talking about refocus and redefinition, we've been doing that this past year or so, but particularly, I think as Councilman Beal raised the last time we talked about it, Carnwath will probably have some bigger
Yeah.
events, and particularly if we do some other things out there during the coming year. So I think it needs to be comprehensive to address
Mm-hmm.
those, and then I think we'll rely on Mr. Haran to say what code changes
Yeah.
we need to look at during the coming year.
Well, one other question I had was regarding, are we looking at deposits, cleanup deposits for reserving the site and refund after?
That can be part of the fee structure of it. I had put in for the events of larger than 100 people, which actually I think the fee schedule wasn't attached to this, sorry. For events larger than 100 people, there was a $100 deposit.
Perhaps we need to consider a separate line item or going forward, or some way to better, account
Yeah.
for it rather than commingling with recreation overall, or is there some process, Jim, for audit, from an audit control point of view?
It's usually something that's held as, and then becomes revenue.
Yeah,
Okay, well,
we'll
Yeah.
think about it.
We'll
I don't-
think about
I mean,
Yeah.
the other question is $100 sufficient?
you're right, agreed.
That's more of a question for Steve.
Well, I think part of it is, we discussed last time,
guess,
is
I mean,
on the size and the nature
Right,
of
it's
it, and
gonna
what
be-
is
right.
the damage that's
Right.
likely to
Yeah.
occur.
Right.
Years ago, when I was much younger, I ran a 40-acre, swim club, but also
Right.
had parks, and I had recreation picnics, and a lot of our, most of our people for those picnics came from South Philadelphia. They're great people, right? But they, after a few beers or so, they destroyed a picnic table once in a while, so we had to have, a deposit that
Yeah.
was able to repay, for that damage, and it worked out fine, but,
Yeah.
determining that fee was, I think, an
Yeah.
important aspect of it.
No.
Okay.
So we can look at that further.
Jessica, at all
Yes.
the parks, is there electricity available? Or
Not at all of them, and also it is not necessarily turned, well, there are some where there is electricity, but it is not currently on. Like, for example, Steve, would you say Quiet Acres? Not, yeah, nothing accessible.
Mart's has it.
Mart's has it, Castle
Slaughterhouse
Point has it,
obviously.
Schlott House.
And Carnwath will have a lot more
Yeah.
availability, I
Yes.
think, as we look at
Yeah,
it.
I, at this point, I can't pinpoint where at Carnwath, but
Yeah,
the other
right,
ones, I
right.
know exactly where you could get hooked
Right.
into electric. So do we have any other questions before I go to the hopefully final draft of this?
Sure. Yeah, final draft for presentation
For
for
pre-
our
yeah, yes.
consideration. May not be
Yes.
the final draft,
Yes.
Jessica, but certainly,
Yes.
to move it forward, yes. And we appreciate the work. I think it's good.
No problem. This is
Okay.
a very big change for us, so, understood.
Okay, thanks. Steve?
Regarding the signs, Recreation Director and I met with the town attorney. We let him know what we thought that the signs should say in layman's terms, and his office is in the process of converting that over to legal language that would uphold in court if the need arises.
So what's your expectation? At the beginning of next year, we'll present a formal proposal on sign language and any code changes,
Input
or?
on that, or?
Yeah, I mean, what's in our code right now is really quite dated.
Right.
And, you know, it goes back to, it references rules that are quite old, and in some respects are somewhat inconsistent, particularly regarding, the signs are somewhat inconsistent with some of the policies. You know, there's reference to, is it horses on, or vehicles on the field? I mean, there's a couple of.
Right, there was a couple of contradictory rules listed on there that we're sorting out.
So, but one of the things actually, which came up, was that, was the issue of hunting.
Right.
And, you know, for smaller parks, you know, as a general rule under the environmental conservation law, you know, it's kind of complicated as far as how close you can get to houses and things like that, so. But, you know, as a general proposition, in a more rural setting, public parks are open to the public for hunting. We've got some larger parcels that might fit that bill, but you know, there's actually an older Attorney General opinion that says that town may not prohibit hunting in its parks.
What about its other lands? Like, I got a question not too long ago from a resident about hunting on this property behind us, you know, bow hunting.
Right, I mean, I mean, technically, it's not a park right now.
That's
so,
why I asked.
It's posted though, isn't it?
Don't know.
Yeah.
We should know. I mean, I'm not against hunting, but I have a concern with folks that are, you know,
Agreed.
could be walking across our
Agreed.
park. I mean, every year, there's a number of innocent hunters that get inadvertently shot. I believe it's 500 feet from a residential dwelling, or depending on how you interpret that. You know, bow hunting versus, you know, long gun hunting, right? I'm not so sure how I feel about allowing hunting in our town parks. I'm not sure that we should entertain that, or at least provide permission
Right.
to do that, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, but right now, there's no affirmative prohibition in the code.
Right, so then perhaps,
So,
shouldn't we solidify the code first before we do these signs then?
Right.
The code needs to be in place, because the signs are from the Town of Wappinger Recreation Commission, right? I think they were put up in the early 80s or something like that, right? Well, maybe some new ones were put up in 2000,
But
but
there's some others
the
that
word-
seem to be a lot older than that.
the wording that's on those signs is the same wording that's in the Reese Park trifold that's from like 1972 or something, right? 68, right. So they may be new signs, but the wording was.
but I mean, so, you know, in looking through the code provisions, there was a couple of areas that kind of came up. One, which I think the board has to consider. One is horses. So, you know, we've got trail networks and things like that, and one of the questions is whether or not horses would be permitted on the trails, and if they were, would that be limited to certain locations? So that was one issue that came up. We also have, I think, some conflicting provisions regarding dogs.
Yeah, we do have
We do,
conflicting.
that's right.
Yeah.
You know, because, and it also goes to the issue of hunting, Because
Exactly.
basically, the way the dog provisions in our code are written, they're more or less written for, they talk about dogs may have to be in control of the owner. They don't necessarily have to be leashed in a park. So if you've got a hunting dog that you can control, you don't have to keep him on a leash.
That actually goes in really good with the park use application that we have in for this weekend, which is dog agility training.
Well, I think that would be, I mean,
They're off leash, but they're very well in control.
dock dogs is a little different than what we're.
No, I know.
No, but
So-
I do have a concern though with allowing the dogs to be off the leash in a non-dog park. We had an issue at Carnwath just recently where somebody was almost attacked
Well,
by
we
a dog.
had a case.
Right.
The jury had to go to court.
Oh, I didn't even know it was a
Yes.
case, but
Yes.
I saw on social media that
No,
there was an individual
there's a
that
case.
the dog wouldn't back down and, he's got a dog. Unless we have a dog park, which I think we should have.
Right.
I'm not so sure the dog should be running around Carnwath. Yeah, it's 99 acres, that's great, but I wouldn't let my German Shepherd run around
Right.
because I don't know what is gonna happen. If a squirrel runs out and, this dog now goes across the road and God forbid gets hit by a car, I mean, there's so many variables. How can you just say, "Hey, come on down to our park,"
And even some of the best
With your
trained
dog.
dogs, I had a Mastiff.
right?
And, it takes a strong person to control it. It's
Right.
all a squirrel.
Right.
And whatever motivated went and drugged me and went and attacked me. If there's a little child there, then that's my
Right.
concern, having had a Mastiff before, Tibetan Mastiff. Beautiful dog.
I mean, I'm all for
Right.
folks being able to run free with their animals, but we also have to remember there's other folks that are, trying to walk around with their dog.
Yeah.
Maybe their dog's on a leash and this dog comes out of the blue. So we need to address that.
Right.
And then, I think there's some Greenway Trail rules,
Yes.
which I can't find actually been kind of codified into the other park rules. So
Yeah,
they kind of,
Yeah.
they're just sort of out there.
I'm not sure you can have horses on Greenway trails. I'm not sure if that's allowed.
There's also the Greenway
But-
Trails, just like town of Wappinger Park plan, it goes into.
Right, but I'm just saying, it
But I
might be good
agree,
to look at what
yeah.
their rules are, because one of the reasons why I've seen certain rules against horses is because it can create additional erosion to the trail.
Right, they do.
But, I think this goes back to the point, and Jim and I have had this discussion as well as here at the board, is that we have a number of other code sections that we should be looking at this year and changing. We've discussed several. I think we have highway permits issue, and then also our water and sewer district code section is totally out of date and inadequate, because it's still there from the old code, old private, systems day, and totally inadequate for what we have. So that's where I think we need to put some priority this coming year.
And, to the point about but there's different types of parks. I mean, we've got
Sure.
passive recreation parks, we've got hiking trail type parks, we've got baseball fields and, playgrounds and things like that. So,
But that's where I think, Jim, what I'd like to do, and we've talked about it before, is refocus the use of some of our parks, so then we can make certain determinations, and our bigger ones like Carnwath, a totally different league of its own, but then, we have also, what do we do with our conservation easement, districts, right? And these same sort of rules should apply, when you look at no hunting or no horses or whatever else, because it tears up, for example, our, catchment bases or our outflow, for wastewater MS4. So I think we need to start pulling some of these things together.
Well, one of the things I think we looked at when we were reviewing the sections was that the requirement was that parks closed, 1 hour after?
Yeah, 1 hour
Af-
after sundown and then open 1 hour before.
And we talked about dusk or
Right.
dawn as,
Right,
Right.
was better, but what was striking was there was no exception for lighted baseball fields.
Right.
So if you had a lit baseball field, technically you still had to be out of the park
Yeah.
at dusk, so.
The code does speak to the Recreation Commission establishing the hours of the park, so
Right.
That needs to be addressed. What also is interesting is it requires you to have a driver's license to operate a snowmobile in a park, and I didn't think we were even allowed to have snowmobiles in our parks.
Yeah, the signs say no motor vehicles.
Well, there's a whole provision here, and
And this is the thing, you know. that
Yeah,
we're
this is what
pointing
we're
out.
talking about. It's-
the code allows it.
Yeah,
Yeah, these
Yeah.
are contradictions that we're
Yeah.
finding.
Yeah, all right,
okay.
thank you.
So I think, Jim, we can talk about, offline,
Okay.
the priorities for a number
Sure.
of these code changes. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you,
Thank
Steve.
you very much. The next item is I want to address, and this is on the 9-element plan. And as we talked about before, the Wappinger Creek, which is really an important part of our town, is continuing to be challenged with respect to a number of factors when it comes to whether it's wastewater, sedimentation, excessive weed growth, algae, nitrates, and so forth. And, we've been having, the board, we heard a little bit a while back, but this slide here shows, if you can look at both sides, on the left, it's basically showing the Wappinger Creek. And for those of you who aren't aware, the drainage area, the watershed area that goes into it is about 135,000 acres. A huge amount of territory when you look at that creek. And we have altogether about 11 towns and 2 villages, and maybe it's 3 villages, I forget. But we're looking at, the whole area that stretches, Dutchess County effectively. And what has happened for people that aren't aware is that over the years, particularly, most importantly, since 1993, there's been a significant increase in sedimentation, and also in the top 3 feet of that sedimentation, more chemicals from runoff of agricultural lands. And then we're seeing a lot more of coliform, forming higher bacteria counts, and that therefore has resulted in the loss of the recreation value of the creek as well as the lake, which does, the lake itself is officially, I guess, legally within the responsibility of the village, but we're the ones that also benefit, and particularly when the creek, runs through alongside a major part of the town. Now, on the next slide, and I presented this to the Cornell Cooperative, at the center that Bill was referring to earlier, and we were having some good dialogue on it. But if you look at the Wappinger Creek watershed, and particularly what we're calling the Dutchess Airport tributary, and I'll talk about it a little bit more, which is really within the area of the town, we have a significant issue and growing issue, as you see here, just with respect to the coliform. This is, a lot of it is really wildlife, runoff horses, and you see these nice pictures of pastoral areas with horses and cows wading through the streams and creeks. Well, that's actually not a good thing, because they leave residue of various forms in that creek water, which gets into the watershed. We also have, as you'll see, when you're looking at phosphorus or you're looking at other content, it's allowing, you can go to the next slide. We're looking at a tremendous amount of weed growth, that in the summer, the lake, and then also the portion of the creek that runs along our Reese Park and down through the Hudson River is, seems like you could actually walk across the lawn, although you can't, but you almost can, because some places there's only a foot of water, that has been the result of all this sediment going into it. In addition, these are just some pictures as we look at sedimentation that's coming from in that area. The village had gotten a major grant. We heard about it before from the New York State that was awarded in 2015. So it's enabled this major study that benefits the town significantly. It was almost $300,000, and looking at other grants going forward. So the next slide, if you would. So really, when you look at the risk is the natural use of it, but also the spread of bacteria and disease, can be quite significant, particularly in highly concentrated areas. And of course, it opens up ultimately more to fines. Speaking of fines, go to the next slide. When we look at sources, we look at really our wastewater treatment facilities, and we're going to be talking a little bit more, as we have previously tonight, about Wildwood, Woodhill Green, but also, as we discussed, and I think Mr. Moot will talk about it as well, is that we've had ongoing, and DEC has continued to look at our plants, and particularly when we look at the specific ones with respect to the creek, Woodhill Green, Wildwood, and Midpoint, Royal Ridge, are the three. The top one, Village Crest, is a private one. Well, part of it, Village Crest, is in our town. I think the wastewater treatment plant is actually on the other side of it, but goes into the creek, nevertheless, which runs down along our properties. And why we're increasingly concerned about it as well is that our major water well site, Atlas Wells, is along the creek, just really south of several of these facilities. So we want to try to proactively avoid contamination going out into the future. So the 5 wastewater treatment plants, plus we have Fleetwood, which has also come under questions by the state, but we'll talk about separately. Then, of course, we have, whether it's hundreds or maybe even more than hundreds of septic systems that feed into that particular creek. And in our town, I think it's probably in the terms of hundreds, since the land out there is a lot less densely populated. So, and as we look at, go to the next slide, this is what we talk about as being the airport tributary, going into the creek, and where a significant amount of whether it's sedimentation or we ultimately look at other runoff is coming into the creek as one example. And what the 9-element plan has done is actually to analyze all of the Daraphin runoffs. They're putting together the final numbers that show degrees of intensity. Certainly our sewer plants along the creek are contributors to this issue. Go to the next page if you look at, and then this is Village Crest I talked about earlier, which has to be dealt with, and probably multi-municipal. And then this is showing the Woodhill and Wildwood. Tim may have other maps, but if you look at the bottom in the middle, there's the red marker, and then you can see the line that we're talking about that will be coming into into tri-municipal, ultimately going through the village. But this would enable us to decommission the Wildwood plant. And Tim's going to be talking about, we discussed last time, of course, one of the issues is really the cost related to that. So we'll hear more, with respect to that. So I think, is that the last slide, Joey? Or is there another one? 2 more? Okay. And then, as you all know, we have Lennon Farms, a construction site, and are looking very, keep monitoring that very closely with respect to sedimentation that can run off into the creek. And this is, part of the issue that now we're trying to be more strict with respect to making sure that our MS4 guidelines, and Walter Artis is actually, spending even more time with helping us. In fact, he's retiring from LaGrange, but staying on with us, so that's the good news, for us, because we're looking at a variety of different issues. So this is, again, as we look at soccer fields that run along, feed into the creek area, trying to make sure that we address this. So going forward, we're going to be having a lot more discussion with this. We are working with the village and the other, 13, I guess, communities up and down the creek on further grant funding. As we all know, the lake has a real challenge to clean it up. There's too many feet of sludge in there, and it's going to cost a huge amount of money to address it, particularly with the first 3 feet. But we'll, I think, during the coming year, be looking at this further and particularly working with everyone to get more funding. So I just wanted to give you a report, and this is what I presented to the folks that are members. We have this organization, for those who aren't aware, called the Wappinger Creek Watershed Intermunicipal Council, and we play an active role in that, even more so than I think in the past. So thank you for your attention. Any questions?
To the lake, at one time, they had a boat that was digging up the growth.
Right.
Anybody ever know what
So,
happened?
so the issue was, one, they couldn't keep up with, the growth, and they only had one boat, and that could only go up and down. And then two, as the sedimentation increases, it has a problem with dredging a good picking up the weeds, digging them up, that, until they solved the problem of dredging, they found it was really more expensive to do that, I believe.
The village owns the lake.
Yes,
So
the village owns the lake,
The village owns the lake, but it's in the town.
yes.
Or half of it's in the
Half of
town of
it's in the
Wappinger, half of it's in the town of Poughkeepsie. The center line of the creek is the boundary. And
Right.
the village, the deed to the lake included the dam and the dam at Red Oaks Mills.
Oh, interesting. Little,
Because that was owned, they were all owned by BNA, the bleachery.
Right. So the dam is another issue, and I received, we have a report about this thick on the, concerns with respect to the dam.
and the dam is owned by the village of Wappingers Falls, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean,
Well,
and the hydroelectric plant has a portion of responsibility relative to the dam.
well, the hydroelectric, there's a contract, the village has a contract with the hydroelectric plant for, in essence, allowing them to use the dam to provide hydroelectric, the water through the penstock. So there's certain obligations and things between that. But going back, the bleachery site is, I guess, a state Superfund cleanup site. And in looking at that years back, it was interesting that there was, I guess, steamer river service
Yes.
that went up to the bleachery site because the bridge at New Hamburg was a swing bridge.
Yeah.
Bridge.
Yeah, I have a picture of one of those steamboats in my house. My question, though, would be, where do you draw the line between public responsibility and private responsibility when you're looking at a number of private sewer plants that, not only the ones that you name here, but there's dozens all the way up to
25 altogether, up and
Yeah.
down the creek.
Right, so where does it become a public responsibility? I mean, and I'm all for correcting this, trust me.
Yeah.
But I think we have to also weigh the responsibility of the taxpayers. Is it the responsibility of the taxpayers to be addressing an issue having to do with private sewer plants?
Well, I mean, and that's basically why we're getting pinned on Wildwood and on Midpoint and at some point on Fleetwood. The way to address it is, we have a speedies permit, and all of those private facilities also have a speedies permit. So in order to reduce the contaminants into the river, or into the creek, and then ultimately the river and downstream, DEC has tightened up the permit requirements for the private plants as well as for us. So, so that's a kind of a double-edged sword, because whatever we're getting, that's the trigger that's making us have
Right.
to improve those plans, because DEC has been tightening up the requirements. And what DEC's suggestion, and Tim will tell you this too, is they would like to see a larger, and this was ultimately the original suggestion for tri-municipal, because the tri-municipal plant was intended to basically serve the entire watershed of the Wappinger Creek, which, when it was proposed back in the 70s, some of these issues would not have, been involved. But Pleasant Valley was included in that plan, the original design proposals, as was LaGrange. So it was, and the town of Poughkeepsie, and I believe parts of Hyde Park is also in the watershed. So
Some of those towns you just named don't even have municipal sewer.
that's correct.
that's right.
But they were all
Yeah.
offered
Right. To this
federal
day,
funding
don't
as
have
part of the
municipal
clean.
sewer.
But, but what they do have is they do have the private sewer corporations.
Right, I know that some have contracted with Dutchess County Water Wastewater to try to solve some of these issues, but again, I hate to say this all the time, in the early 1970s, when there's 95% reimbursement from the feds on
Yeah,
these
you're
projects,
right.
where were these municipalities,
stuck.
including this one? And what we were doing was opting out of certain things, if you look back at the minutes.
You're right.
And
I agree with you.
That's all I'm gonna
As
say.
to look at. No, absolutely. So, but unfortunately, the burden's on us now to try to
Bill,
correct.
the term is penny wise, pound foolish.
I will not comment further. I will respect my own.
Okay, well, now that we've had this beginning introduction, we'll let.
Good segue,
you
right?
take the hot seat on this one, okay?
We'll give these guys 14 minutes in the back. If you can stay 14 minutes, we'll sign your paper.
Oh, okay.
Sorry you can't speak, we won't allow you.
So we want to open up Wildwood in the last
Yes,
file
that's
on the
good.
list there. So good evening, everyone. So just to pick up on Wildwood and Supervisor Thurston's previous kind of synopsis there, on this diagram, there's two blue circles, one upper, you see the little blue circle there, Joey?
Up in the top corner.
Man. Well, so the top corner, there's a top one by Wildwood in the pink shaded area. You see it? The little blue circle there. So that's the point of discharge currently for Wildwood, that little circle there, and that's the wastewater treatment plant. And there's another blue circle down lower at Wood Hill Green. So those are the two discharge points of the failing wastewater
And the
treatment.
discharge then flows into the
Discharge,
creek.
Right. So Wood Hill will go into the lakes portion, and Wildwood goes downstream, I guess it goes. Upstream, right? So anyway.
Wildwood is upstream.
Right.
Upward.
So we applied for a grant, an intermunicipal grant with EFC. Back in November of 2018, we had the offer letter on the table for $2.484620, $2.4 million, almost $2.5 million. And we've worked toward their checklist all throughout the year. And up until where we had the last meeting last month, we presented basically the user rate fees relative to that 2.5 million as a standalone money coming into the project. Last time we recapped that, the Wildwood residents currently are only paying O&M charges, and that's roughly $547.88.
And the Wildwood's the pink area, correct?
Wildwood yes,
District.
Correct, yep. And Wood Hill is the blue. So we discussed those user rates, and it was basically going to boil down to like a $349 surcharge on top of the O&M rate with the current 2.48 million on the table. And I qualified that number because that's like a quote-unquote real number. We have an offer letter from the state for that grant funding. We also have two outstanding grants that we should hear if they will be awarded within the next 2 weeks, and that would be the WQIP for another 2.5 million and the local government efficiency grant for 400,000. Now, if we get the combination of those, we won't be able to get the full 2.48. It's a 40% max cost. But the point is, I could break down the numbers here. The best case, if we got all the funding available to us, it would only be a $20.91 annual increase to the users for Wildwood. But in the meantime, and since our last meeting, we sort of got a final letter from EFC saying we need to commit by the end of January. So on the 2.48 million. So I called EFC last week and basically said, we're really contingent on this other funding, and that the numbers were pretty high as they were with just the 2.48. So they've agreed to wait until the CFA grant announcements, like I say, which would be within the next 2 weeks. I was told December 16th.
16th
or
is
after.
what yeah.
So once those numbers are announced, we'll sort of have a better idea what the funding pool is. We'll need to follow up with EFC But in any event, there's a lot of paperwork and submissions and things that need to be filed by their stipulated date of January 31st, 2020. In that mix, the town has 2 notice of violations, one for Wildwood and one for Midpoint Park. Joey, if you want to jump to the other folder with the map for Midpoint Park, that's the overall first one. So these are, Midpoint is another citation on flow, basically that, you know, it's superseded its speedies permit, it's undersized, it's old, it needs to be replaced. So we started looking at 2 design concepts. Midpoint is, you can see it there, and you can, no, isn't it down lower there? That blue dot? Oh, that's Schlott, yeah. Yeah, okay, so Midpoint, so basically option A is to gather the effluent within Midpoint Park and send it south to Tri-Muni. So that's what that one option A is, the red line sort of going down the screen. And what's a benefit of that option is that it's a shorter run compared to option B, and this allows more capability for residents to tie in. So it could potentially serve more residents. Option B is the red line to the right of that, Joey. To the right of that. And option B actually only serves Midpoint and sends it to East Fishkill, basically, which is a much longer run. So, I mean, these are the 2 options that we're faced with. But relative to these notice of violations, we had a meeting with DEC back on September 24th, in which case I pleaded the case that the town was actively pursuing funding for Wildwood, and that, you know, while there's 2 notice of violations, to me, Wildwood should take care of itself, in essence, relative to this grant funding coming in. And the second part of it is, so we need to go back on record on behalf of the town to DEC on an action plan moving forward, you know, relative to both Wildwood and Midpoint Park. So we've created a draft, basically, flow management report. I believe a previous flow management report was done for Midpoint Park back in 2015, I think it was. And basically what they want to see is that the town is actively trying to mitigate inflow and infiltration, that the flow in the sewer is basically what's tipping the scales on the speedies permit. So there's some active investigation work and possible remediation work that could be done on the town's behalf. So with that, we are presenting, let's try the, where are you in the folders? Can you back up one? It'll be the 4th file down from the top or 2nd up from the bottom. DEC Wildwood Midpoint, is that it? No, no, that's not it. Oh wait, sorry, back out of that folder altogether. I put it where it was too obvious. All the way in the front, yeah, that one right there. So if you just scroll to the bottom of that, basically we have 2 sets of scheduling items that we're presenting to DEC on behalf of the town, and the more detailed one is relative to Midpoint Park. And you can see it's basically a long-range 6-year plan. And within there, we've agreed to start implementing some of our investigation work. There is a cost to this work. I mean, we're going to have to basically roll up our sleeves, look at the system. We'd have to hire a subcontractor to do sewer videos and inspections, manhole inspections, and basically start to piece together a investigative report that sort of identifies areas that need to be rectified.
And this is again related to I&I.
This is all I&I with it, yep, inflow. So there's another timeline that's independent of the Midpoint Park, and that's some of our discussions at Tri-Muni. Right. They are also coming up with their own wastewater treatment plant upgrades, so we've asked the consultant there to basically give us an outline of his projected timeline that will factor in to this as well. And then going back to the Wildwood case, like I was saying, we sort of quelled DEC because we're basically citing the same schedule that we've had to for the funding. And, you know, we're optimistic. I mean, as time goes on, we would have hoped to have the town engaged by now in a contract with EFC for the funding, but we've actively, because we got authorization, we've started the survey, we started some of the preliminary design, but we're basically looking at submitting design plans and specs on Wildwood to EFC and DEC by July of 2020. Construction could start March of 21 and theoretically be completed by the end of 2021. So these are all sort of tentative commitments that, you know, the DEC is looking for us to go on record by January 8th was our cutoff commitment deadline for that response.
Right.
So with all that being said, we have a lot of decisions to make in a very short period of time, and we're trying to integrate that with the, you know, the meeting schedules and whatnot, but we may, I don't know how you want to handle it, but may need to call a special meeting or something once all the numbers are in, I think.
Tim, as far as Tri-Muni, we hear they're almost at capacity all the time.
They are, no.
So what is their ability to expand? What would that put on us, and what are our options? Because for me, being new here, it doesn't sound like a good option to me, honestly.
Right. Well, so I'm not all that savvy with all the numbers, so
Right.
I'll speak plus or minus or approximately. I think they're at about a 2.6 million gallon average day. And there's a capital project that's being formulated right now at about 7 million. And with that 7 million, there's hopes of being able to basically augment the capacity to 3.2 million. And with that, there's cleaning of some really long-term surge tanks that haven't been maintained in years, so we don't know. That could be a simple thing to address. There's clarifier upgrades, there's the discharge pipe. You know, believe it or not, there's a 30-inch pipe that comes into the plant and a 16 or 18-inch pipe that leaves the plant. So there's some hydraulic imbalance there. So we're trying to look at what are the quick fixes that can increase the capacity in a short period of calendar time.
I'm just looking at it, we're spending a lot of money, and Tri-Muni's gonna get some of it, and is that our best option? And what are our options to leverage our relationship with them?
So we've looked at, like I pointed out, with Midpoint going to East Fishkill, and there's some other concepts on the boards that we can share with you, but unfortunately, none of it's cheap.
Yeah, it
You know,
seems like
I
nothing is cheap.
think with respect to Tri-Muni, and we can talk about this more, you know, separately, because of some of the, you know, liability or potential liability issues that we talk about. But I think when you look at those numbers that Tim's talking about, their total number right now is around $12 million if you except for the two tanks that, you know, Tim was talking about. And when we're looking at that, as far as the tanks, they're located in the village of Wappinger Falls, but one is the town tank, which actually seems to be in much better shape. The village tank is underground and has all sorts of trees growing out of it and so forth. So that's now gotten, you know, the engineers are going in there to look at, you know, what these surge tanks can do. You know, the design is to handle the excess flow from the heavy rains or snow melt off and then discharge it. There's no sensors or anything in there. So when they look at everything, including what Tim talked about, they believe that actually they can get up over 3 million, you know, gallons as compared to the 2.6 if you control it better. And then there's a possibility of another surge tank. So I think, you know, part of what we've, you know, been talking about before in connection with other projects is our own I&I challenges and the ability to, you know, address those as whether or not it's current projects, you know, like Pavilion. You know, we went in, Mike Tremper went in and took a TV cameras of all the Pavilion system, found significant I&I issues, which we knew. They now have, you know, they hired their own engineer. They're in the process of reviewing, and hopefully they'll start doing some maintenance and repair work in after the snows melt come the spring. That could actually increase our volume that we can put into, there. But as of the last meeting of the board, they've officially gone on record, there's no more inflow that can be taken into Tri-Muni. They've officially, stated that until all the I&I issues are addressed. So it's a major challenge at this time. But I think we have, CPL, taking a close look at what also C Engineering is doing. So we're making sure that the town's interests are there. Ultimately, to your point, it may be we have to look at how, with our potential cost into this, that we, seek, Tri-Muni participation rather than paying the huge tenancy fees. It's one option. We are talking with East Fishkill. We're looking at, Beacon has excess capacity. As far as if we bring in new developments, then where do they go? Obviously, Tri-Muni can't
I was just
handle
looking
it.
at that plan there.
Yeah.
If you want to route that to Tri-Muni, if they're at capacity now, where's,
Well, Tri-Muni, as far as Wildwood concerned, we're hoping that in working
We
with.
have a commitment that they can handle Wildwood.
But
It's just
with
beyond
making some of
theirs.
these other, they're moving aggressively on making some of the changes, then plus with Pavilion working on that at this point in time, now that they're fully engaged on their I&I issue, then that can probably take care of that issue.
And it's a cumulative effort, like we
Yeah.
talked about new developers coming in, and maybe there needs to be some sort of buy-in fee for them, and that goes toward addressing some of this I&I, so that it's a constant sort of work in progress.
thank you.
The one thing about the I&I, when you're looking at the sewer systems, you have to look at the collection system and the treatment system as two different components. So regardless of where the effluent is treated, the I&I is an important task to undertake because it's going to reduce the amount of effluent that gets treated. So, it's never going to be a loss. So, regardless of whether you go to Tri-Muni or you go to East Fishkill, any I&I work within the district itself will be a benefit to the district.
Correct.
And back in 2015, when Midpoint was done, Midpoint, like Tall Trees, there was a number of improvement areas for water and sewer in the town. These were private, either water or sewer corporations that were taken over by the town when they were failing. And the town took them over as improvement areas rather than districts, because in that case, they were then not subject to permissive referendum. That was the way to get around the permissive referendum requirement. And back when the work was done in Midpoint Park was changed from an improvement area to a district, to a straight district, because of, again, some strange issues in the way special districts are run. So that was done, and there was work. Was there plant upgrades done at that time too? I don't know. So there was
I seem to recall there was, and certainly
there
with
was
filtration and some other things.
Some plant upgrade work, but also a lot of lining. One of the technologies that's now come out, which has made it a lot more cost effective for towns, is rather than digging up, 20 years ago, if you had big I&I issues, what you would have to do is go in, excavate all the existing piping, take it out and replace it. Now there's lining provisions that are in place where you can put in bladders and things to put in a plastic liner inside an existing pipe, which has made it a lot more cost effective to do all of this work, which was a technology that wasn't available 20 years ago. So and TVs and drone, remotely piloted vehicles and things like that. These are all new technologies that weren't available in the past, which has made it, easier for an operating entity to gain information that they never had the opportunity to do in the past. So with those tools, we have some abilities. And when Tri-Muni was originally developed, there's a lot of excess capacity, there's a lot of extra space there, you know, the site was selected to build a much bigger plant than is currently there. So there's a lot of room to expand if the need be, but obviously, there's a cost associated with that.
And then the DEC did warn us that Fleetwood now also will follow suit to these other two notice of violation. It's not there yet, but.
Right. And again, the DEC's preference is to have larger treatment facilities to handle broader areas. They don't like smaller facilities that are distributed with, you know, various outflows. Not quite sure, but that's, their preference is for a larger facility.
Well, it's also getting into the Hudson River, which
Right.
is a much bigger watershed. So
Well, that too.
Okay, thank you, Tim. So we'll keep the board advised, but we're getting down probably in the first meeting in January, maybe even at the organization meeting, we need to look at something, but, so, you know, thanks to CPL, they've been making some really good contributions to keeping this going. So, and we'll let you know as soon as we hear on the grant applications. Okay, you know, the next item that we didn't, you know, said we would follow up, and we, you know, don't need to make a decision tonight, but to look at the recycle center, you know, fees, or what we really call a transfer yard, you know, fees, and whether or not we want to start considering increasing. These were just examples across the board, but maybe there are some areas such as Freon or double axle, or, you know, that might make approval, you know, not recommending all these. It's just, as we looked at numbers, these were possible areas that could be done as far as one approach to addressing the overall issue of the deficit at the recycle center, transfer yard. So it's something that we should be considering going forward, probably tackle at the beginning of the year, especially when we have a new highway superintendent, and get his input on how to better manage that facility and overall. He's committed to reducing costs by $100,000, so I think we'll want to get his strong support and buy-in on this. Sure. Okay. So that's all we need to discuss that right now. The next item is to acknowledge January 8th as the date for our reorganization meeting. You know, at the beginning of the year, for residents, we always have a meeting that takes care of a lot of the standard housekeeping items, you know, so that's what we call the reorganization meeting. So is that okay, and maybe have a motion to accept that date?
I'll move it.
There's a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, a motion second, and all in favor?
Aye.
Any nays, abstentions? Seeing none, the 8th will be our
Yeah,
reorganization.
the only question I have, and obviously I won't be on the board, so it won't really make a difference, is that the 6th is the Monday.
Yeah, that's
They
what,
said there was a conflict.
Oh,
I had
there's
a
a
conflict.
Oh, I
yeah.
got you.
Oh, okay.
Remember,
Understood.
you know, I had a
Understood, okay.
continuing legal education
Okay, no problem.
requirement. That's
No,
what I'd
that
sent out to you.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Just was curious as to
Yeah,
that.
that's fine. The next item was to change the time, the future meetings to 7 PM. You know, I believe also Councilwoman Bettina had indicated, since she couldn't be here, that that was acceptable.
I have no objection, I just want to make sure that we're not going to be continuing to go till 11.
Right, well,
11
that was the
o'clock.
idea, to try to better manage that.
We can start earlier and
Yes.
go to 11.
No.
That defeats
The
purpose.
intention is not to do that.
You know, I have no objection to the 7 o'clock start, and I would assume that's going to be applied to the January 8th meeting
Correct,
also.
yeah, that's right.
All right,
Okay.
I'll move that we formally adopt the 7 PM start.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passed.
It might be also appropriate to mention that January 4th would be the inauguration
Yes.
ceremony.
I mentioned that at the outset in the comments that I made when I was
Right.
talking about the election and so forth, but
What
yeah,
time is that going to be?
Noon,
12
12
noon
o'clock.
on
Here,
Saturday,
in this room.
January 4th?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so the next items will be our other resolutions, the official resolutions. And this is, the first item would be Resolution 2019-213. These two companion resolutions are, pertaining to the zoning code change that we've discussed at some length. And Mr. Capelli here is here to answer any questions of the board. Again, reminding everyone that we're here just talking about the zoning, change that would apply, throughout basically the town. I think we identified previously perhaps 5 properties that were perhaps relevant to it. So this one, first one is 2019-213, resolution introducing local law number 1 of 2020, which would amend Chapter 240, zoning of the town code with respect to the addition of liquid propane storage facilities as a new special permit use in the highway, business, and airport industry zoning districts.
I'll move.
Is there a second?
I'll second this, and on the question, I did have some concerns about this that go back a couple months, and I want to thank David Stallman, as well as the zoning administrator, Barbara Birdie, the building inspector, Susan Deo, the fire inspector, Howie Prager, the fire chief, and the assistant chiefs from the Houstonville Fire Department who had some questions regarding a potential proposed project that would now, assuming this is passed, would be able to fit into this special permit use. I think we really, as a town, did our due diligence, David, on this. Any thoughts?
There's more due diligence to do. Of course, this is going to the planning board.
Right.
And once the applicant makes application to the planning board will declare its intent to be lead agency. At your recommendation, become
Sure.
lead agency, go through
Yes.
the secret process.
Right.
This might even evolve more to get more
Right.
safe.
But in order to get to that point, this particular zoning change and special permit use will need to be adopted by this board so that they can proceed to the planning board, go through the secret process, and be able to really evaluate the environmental impacts that that could exist at that site and how we can, as a town, approach that. Correct?
Right, and the planning board will go through the secret process
Yep.
and finish the secret process before you take action to actually create the zone.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
And, for us, we've already had one public hearing, which was required, and the planning board will then presumably have a public meeting.
We haven't had a
as well.
public hearing.
We haven't
No,
had
not
an
yet.
official public,
Yeah.
we've had a public,
We had public discussion here on this.
We also had a meeting between the last time we
Right.
saw this and now,
Correct.
which Bill attended and others attended, town staff.
Correct.
Applicants, representatives, and we went through quite a bit.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
And I
Just
think-
wanted to make sure, so.
so
our
the
community knows.
secret process associated with this law is going to be it will be broader than just this one particular site.
Right.
So
Yep.
it'll encompass all of the sites
Yeah.
that where
Identify.
this would be permitted.
Correct.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any nays or abstentions? The motion passed. The next item is 2019-214. This is a resolution authorizing the refund of unused escrow for BJ's propane tank refill station, not related to the same project. This is a different one,
What a coincidence.
coincidentally.
I'll move it.
A second?
All in favor? Aye. Any nays or abstentions? Motion passed. Al, you're ready to go. Thank you. Thank you for your work up to now. The next item is the correspondence log 2019-215. Per our discussion at the outset of the meeting, I want to instruct the town clerk to add the items, the two items pertaining to the $32,352 and $2,500 amounting to the $35,000 from the TLA Realty, also known as Old Hopewell Commons. If we would add those to the correspondence log to make a complete record. And with that, do I have a motion?
I'll move it.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any nays or abstentions? The motion passes. Any items for special consideration, new business? This item on communication, just for clarification, is for Joe to actually be able to put the documents in to maintain the strong record, the way the program works, and Joe, you can explain it, you know, he needed to have a placeholder rather than the old way doing it. So Joe, why don't you just mention why this item 7, communications, is there?
Yeah, for resolutions, you could easily attach documents. For discussion items, you can't. So I found a way with this program that you can add under something called communications. And it shows up just like the correspondence block does at the end of the minutes, as you can see there in the full agenda.
Okay, so just to clarify why that item's there. So any other items for special consideration,
Yep.
new business announcements, or what
Well,
have?
yeah, I have a couple of things that I want to
Sure.
say. First, since of course it's going to be the last meeting of the year, in addition to wishing everybody a happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year, I do want to thank the supervisor for acknowledging my years of service as a councilman. I'm grateful for the opportunity that I've been given to represent the residents of the Fourth Ward, and I'm proud of the many things that, with the help of the past boards and this present board, we have worked to get accomplished, such as keeping our taxes low and below the tax cap every year while maintaining essential services, the improvements to Martz Field and Schleithouse Park, most notably the tennis courts, pavilion, and playgrounds, the building and ongoing improvements at Inspiration Field at Robinson Lane, for which I want to especially thank the present town board and the Bruschetti family for all they've done in that regard, and for our increased town patrols and tougher property maintenance laws, just to name a few. These were great accomplishments, and I thank everyone who worked with me to help make this a reality, especially our present town board. Councilman Beal, I've served with you from the town board from the beginning, and I know that how hard you worked and how instrumental your efforts were for many things, especially for making sure that we adopted responsible budgeting. I thank you for that collaboration, that all we've done during those years, and for your friendship, so thank you. Supervisor Thurston, I enjoyed working with you this past term, especially for your professionalism in making our town a more positive place, and for our conversation, so thank you. For Council Member Bettina, who's not here, and for Council Member Phillips, I wish you the best and success in the upcoming term. You have a great foundation to work on. I know you'll work very well to make and be successful in making our town of Wappinger a better place to live. So I have utmost confidence that you'll do that. So thank you for the time that we spent on the board together. I also want to thank Ralph Holt for his friendship and for all he did for the town. Our work together as recreation liaison to the town board was some of the fondest memories I had as a councilman. Much of what we did in recreation would not have been possible without him. So I know he's not here, but I want to especially thank Ralph Holt, because I can tell you that my years of a councilman were much enhanced, and we did much more because of his involvement. So I want to thank him personally for that. And finally, I want to thank all the residents who supported me during my years as councilman. I can hardly express what an honor and privilege it has been to serve as your councilman. I'm not going to be presumptuous enough to consider whether or not I will be missed, but I can tell you honestly, I'll miss many of you. Thank you.
Mike, before everybody claps for you,
The 6 people.
everyone at home is clapping in their living rooms watching this. I purposely did not jump in before you started speaking, so I would have the last word. Just because it's important to you that I do. From 2012 through 2019, Councilman Cosmas has been more than just a councilman, really. His passion for this town has been evident in his focus on recreational aspects and opportunities, and working with Ralph Holt, as he just explained, on the surface appears to be at times a professional relationship. But I just want to inform everyone that Mike goes above and beyond for Ralph Holt, and whether it be taking him to church or keeping an eye on him, making sure he's okay. And Ralph obviously has gone through some challenges over the last few years, personally and physically. And Councilman Cosmas really has really gone above and beyond to keep tabs on one of our real heroes of this town. And I think it's worth mentioning those personal type of things, rather than giving a list of all your accomplishments that I have in front of me too. you know, it's things like that that really mean the most, in my opinion, when it comes to someone serving this town and its residents. Mike and I have had literally hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of discussions, you know, whether it be at the Falls Diner or wherever else, about ways that we can work together to improve this town through a number of administrations. And I can tell you that no matter who sits up here at this dais, Mike has extended his knowledge and abilities to them to help better this town. And I believe that your legacy in this town is going to be your impact on recreation, and most specifically Inspiration Field, which is something that not every town has. And you can be proud of that. So I wish you the best in your next chapter, whatever that may be. And I certainly would welcome your input on anything that we're doing up here moving forward. So with that, I offer my congratulations on a job well done.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Well, I'd just like to thank Mike for his friendship. He was one of the ones who helped me get started as a councilman, and I appreciate his support and his friendship, and thank you for your years of service to the town. You've been here for a while, and the town appreciates your work.
Well, you're welcome. If you need anything, you know just where to get me. I'll be there for you.
And as Mike leaves his legislative capacity, and as Joey enters a legislative capacity, you know, in January, you need to look to people like Mike, and you need to listen more than you talk, because no, I mean, I don't mean that in a facetious way, but honestly, you know, these are individuals that have, you know, a wealth of wisdom to provide you as you start a new chapter from a legislative perspective in your life. So don't hesitate to reach out to someone like Councilman Kuzmas, who has, you know, had to make tough decisions.
Very well said. Okay, I'd like to have a motion to go into executive session. We have some personnel and contract matters to discuss.
I'll make that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we'll, all in favor, aye. So any nays or abstentions? Motion passed. We'll break and go into executive session. Thank you.
Now you get to go.